Hi, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon. I always say that because I'm running the gamut in terms of where you're sitting in this world. My name, as Holly mentioned, is Beth Wagner. I am a Master Facilitator at Fierce, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with all of you today. Again, thank you, Holly, for a wonderful introduction. We're here today to talk about the real issue. 5 Fierce strategies for addressing toxicity in your organization. And to get us started, I'd like to just share with you what our journey looks like for the next hour. So we're going to start with the toxic behavior, the current reality, which is really the business case around toxic behavior. If you've been to some of the Fierce webinars in the past, you'll know that we do a lot of our research in terms of what's going on right now in the industry. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and toxic behavior and toxic employees. Then we're going to dig into the costs. So what are the costs associated with toxic behavior? And more importantly, what are some strategies that you can use to remove the impact of toxic employees in your workplace? And as Holly had mentioned, hopefully we'll have some really good time for Q&A. You guys always bring great questions, so hopefully I can bring some good answers to you. All right, so I want to take you back to begin with. I want to take you back a few years to when you were a kid. And I want you to think about the kaleidoscope. For those of you that had that toy growing up, maybe you have kids now, they have that toy. What happened when you looked through that kaleidoscope and turned it even the tiniest bit? A piece dropped, right? And then the entire image changed. So once that picture changed, were you ever actually able to go back to the previous picture, the one that was there before that piece dropped? No, right? That original picture was gone for good. That one single piece impacted the entire image. And we can think of our teams and our organizations the same way. So with one person, one conversation, one interaction, the entire picture can shift. In fact, the behavior of one can and does impact the experience or the success of all. So let's begin with this. I want you to take a moment wherever you're sitting, and I want you to bring to mind someone whose behavior you would like to change. And I always say this, just think of one. You don't need to think of 10, although we might have that many that we're dealing with at the moment. Think of one. Someone whose behavior has become toxic, or someone who is currently impacting your team, your organization, the culture of your workplace. This is a person you'd really like to change the behavior of because they are literally wreaking havoc. They're wreaking havoc. Now I want you to write their name down. You can write in code, or if you don't want to write it down, just stick it in your brain for the next hour. And contrary to perhaps what you might be feeling right now, I am not doing this or asking you to do this to elevate your blood pressure or to frustrate you even further. What I want you to realize is what this individual is actually costing you, your team, your organization, and more importantly, I want you to learn how you can deal with them in a productive way, how you can start to remove the toxicity. Not necessarily remove the person, although I'm sure many of you would like to do that, but we're going to talk about how you can lead through this behavior, how you can change the current reality for the better. Now, toxicity in organizations, specifically the impact toxic employees have on an organization's bottom line and culture, is a really hot topic today. Google it. It's everywhere. And it has been for a while, and the reason is because these individuals are real, and they are causing real significant problems. So let's talk about who they are. Who is this they that we speak of? A toxic employee, as defined by a recent Harvard Business Review article, are those who engage in behavior that is harmful to an organization, its property, or its people. Does this sound about right when you layer that definition onto the person whose name you just thought of? Are they having a harmful impact? These individuals and organizations have many faces. So let's just name a few, right? They're the slackers. So those are the ones that avoid the work and never seem to get reprimanded for it. They tend to slip by. They're the martyrs. They're the ones who insist on doing everything themselves, and then they let you know how much they're sacrificing to get it done. And the inflated egotists. These are the ones who overestimate their skills and walk around with that chip on their shoulder, shouting just how good they are. And interestingly, this latter group, the egotists, they're also the ones that play the best victims. They play the best victims. They shirk responsibility when something goes wrong because, of course, it couldn't possibly be their fault, right? So, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We could come up with so many more characters to add to this list. The bottom line, these people seem to find fresh, new ways of making our work lives a living hell. I mean, that's really the bottom line. They're the bullies of the business world. And in a recent fear survey, to take this a little bit further, there are several traits that respondents feel from that survey are detrimental. They're part of that toxic behavior group. Of those currently unsatisfied in their jobs, laziness was cited above negative attitude as the most detrimental trait a coworker can have. So when they're shirking work and they're not pulling their weight. In addition to that, millennials, that generation, believes that when people blame others, that's the most toxic behavior. In fact, blaming others for millennials is a more detrimental trait than any other of the age groups. So millennials really feel strongly about that. And then 50% of company presidents that were surveyed believe that truly a negative attitude is the most detrimental trait. The most detrimental. So here's what I want to know, and I'm going to pull in a poll for you guys to share with me what you think. But aside from our personal frustrations and well-being, right, what greater impact are these employees actually having at work? I mean, are they really that damaging, or are they just a nuisance? So I want to hear from you. Personal well-being aside, what impact would you say toxic employees are having on your team and your organization? So you have a couple choices. First, heaps. Now, maybe you've thought about quitting your job because of these people or this person. The behavior of one truly is bringing down everyone else, and the culture is suffering. Two is, okay, it's enough. It's having enough of an impact. It's definitely affecting our work. While I may not want to quit my job over them, this behavior is not a good thing. And finally, not much. We just try to ignore it. It's a nuisance, but we try to get on with our work. So we're going to scoot on over to the results. And I know some of you are still busy voting, but it looks like the majority of you, as you're starting to make your votes, are looking in the middle. So enough. It's affecting our work. So maybe I don't want to quit my job, but it's affecting our work. And yet, almost 40% of you are saying, yeah, this is a huge problem, right? And then we've got a couple percent that come in right down at the bottom saying, you know what, we're just ignoring it, putting our heads down and doing our work. So as you continue to vote, and I'll give it a few more moments before we head back, I just want to share that if you voted A or B, heaps or enough, you're actually in the majority. And so I'd like to ask Holly, now that we have the majority of people voting, let's go back to the slides because I'd like to share why you're in the majority. In fact, according to recent data by Cornerstone On Demand, rockstar employees, now these are people that are defined as being in the top 1% of productivity in their workplace. They are 54% more likely to resign when they work with a toxic employee. This is real information. So people are actually leaving their jobs, and not just regular people, top talent, because of this behavior. So getting back to the fear survey, for the organization as a whole, respondents believe a toxic employee decreases morale, followed by decreasing productivity and decreasing the quality of work. And over half of respondents believe that between a negative peer, manager, or company leader, all are equally detrimental to an organization. So it doesn't matter what their hierarchy. While there may be differences of opinion in terms of what is the most toxic trait, it's beyond clear that these employees are having a detrimental impact on our businesses. So I'm going to do something I've never done before, which is a back-to-back poll, because I want to know now, given what we know about this impact, what's being done to change this? So I want to hear from you. If toxic employees are wreaking havoc, even driving our best talent away from our organizations, how's your organization dealing with them? How are you dealing with toxic employees? First option, we're confronting the behavior head on. So we are skilled at dealing with these individuals, and when we see this toxic behavior surface, we're having that direct conversation. Two is we're not doing as much as we could. So we know the behavior needs to be addressed, but we either don't know how to address it or perhaps we skirt the issue. It's not effective. And finally, we're avoiding it. like the plague, so avoidance is our strategy. So let's go on over to the results and see how people are voting. And so we've got a pretty even mix. It's pretty much most people are falling in that B category again. Yeah, we know we need to do something, but we're not doing as much as we could. I applaud the organizations and the people that are in A. I think that's fantastic, that you have the skill and you're having the conversations. And for those of you who are avoiding it, hang tight. We're going to talk a little bit more about how you can start engaging with it when we get off of this webcast. And I know some people are still voting, but I just want to take a moment and thank you for your responses regardless of where you sit. We're going to go back to our presentation and start talking about this a little bit more. Fierce actually found in our survey that over half of those people that were participants in the survey said that they do indeed ignore toxic individuals. And less than a quarter said they actually have the courage to confront these people directly, which means they're probably doing it through email or even delegating the conversation to somebody else, right? It's easy to sit here and scratch our heads and say, well, why is this? If these individuals are so detrimental to our businesses, why are leaders not taking action? Why are we not taking action? And believe it or not, there's a very rational and ironic answer to that. The hard thing about toxic employees is that these individuals oftentimes outperform others. You don't need to clean your ears out. You heard me correctly. They outperform other people. In fact, according to a report by Harvard's Hausman and Miner, toxic employees are often much more productive than the average employee, at least in terms of getting things done. So this research went on to show that while the output is there, sometimes the quality of work, or at least how the work is getting done, is less than desirable. But in other words, we're turning a blind eye to these individuals because their numbers are just too good. I read a term the other day and it fits this to a T. It's called failing up. That's what these individuals are doing. They're failing up. They're producing with work, but they're leaving this terrible wake in their past. I mean, I picture, if you've ever seen the cartoon, the Tasmanian Devil, the cartoon character, I picture that cartoon character. He certainly puts on a good show. He's got a lot of action, but holy cow, does he leave a dreadful amount of carnage in his past. So it's this failing up that makes it really hard for leaders to address toxic behavior because, quite frankly, I mean, it's easier to avoid the failing behavior and focus on the up part or the output. So we say things to each other. We say things like, but see, he's making the most money on his deal, so we can't get in the way of that. Or, see, she brings in the biggest clients. She must be doing something right. Just don't be so sensitive. The numbers are just too good, so we avoid the conversation. So there's definitely a problem in the sense that the individual's behavior is creating a toxic environment. And I would add that an equally harmful problem is that we all recognize the behavior, but we're failing to do something about it. And I actually want to take that back because I want to acknowledge the 20% of you that just took this poll that said, no, we are doing something about it, or even those that are starting to do something, but perhaps not enough. So I want to acknowledge that, and I want us all to be invested and engaged in this because I'm hearing many of you out there thinking this, okay, Beth, so what? So what that their behavior stinks? They are making the business money. I mean, isn't that more important? Isn't it more productive to focus on the positive and ignore the negative? Shouldn't that be what we're concerned with? And I'm so glad you asked that question because I want to explore that for a moment. I want to explore what are the real costs when we ignore or avoid toxic behavior, even when the employee appears to be performing. And while we walk through this, here's when I want you to think back to that one person you identified just a few minutes ago, because I want you to really get a grip on what is the real cost of their behavior. And do any of the following that I'm going to walk through fit for them? So the real cost of avoiding these conversations, you know, at Fierce, we talk a lot about the fact that our careers, our companies, our relationships, our very lives succeed or fail gradually, then suddenly, one conversation at a time. So gradually, then suddenly, our teams are impacted by that one toxic individual. Gradually, then suddenly, we lose a really great client. We lose that rock star employee because we're not having the conversation needed to address the behavior. When we fail to confront, we're actually putting our businesses at risk. So what is this costing us? Number one, people. Remember that stat that I shared just a few minutes ago? Rockstar employees are 54% more likely to resign when they work with a toxic employee. So we're actually losing our best talent because we're failing to address this behavior. And don't think that this is just reserved for our employees. That toxic behavior destroys customer relationships too, in a big way. If you have a customer-facing employee who's negative, who's volatile, who's inappropriate, they risk losing clients and staining your company's reputation. I mean, we lose clients to toxic behavior. That's what happens. And I'm going to give you an example that I have that's fairly fresh for me. I know a very successful leader in the building and construction industry here in New England, which is where I live and work from. And about 4 years ago, he left his job at a very large, reputable company. Let's call him Company X, right? Because in his experience, the director of operations bullied the employees. This individual was dishonest, wildly conceited, and only seemed to care about making himself look good. Do you know anybody like that? And he was a leader, right? He was the director of operations. And this individual that I'm speaking about that left the company, at this point he was done. He had been there 9 years. 9 years is a long time. He had put up with a lot of this behavior and he was finally done with it. He couldn't deal with it anymore. So fast forward to today, 4 years later, and this leader now owns his own company that directly competes with his old company, Company X. And he is just now starting to see the ripple effect of that behavior that he labeled so toxic. In the last 3 months alone, I think this is fascinating, he's had numerous clients, not just one, numerous, who had all been previously engaged with his old company, Company X, call him up and say, I'm so excited you started your own business. I don't think we can work with their director of ops anymore. We want to work with you instead. Now, they didn't say we think that this other company, Company X, turns out a bad product. They said, we can't work with that one individual. Eye-opening. That's an eye-opening example to me. And I'm sure that director of operations doesn't even know, perhaps, maybe he does, or the other individuals in that organization that they're actually losing real business because of his behavior. Toxic employees, even leaders, can chip away at a company's success. It can steal them of their best customers until that behavior becomes irreversibly destructive for the organization. And it happens gradually, then suddenly. Suddenly, they no longer have that business because gradually that individual chipped away at the reputation of the organization. One failed, one missing conversation at a time. So we lose people. That's number one. So what else is avoidance costing us? From a high level, it's definitely costing us productivity. We've worked with companies at Fierce who've had entire projects stalled, amounting to thousands upon thousands of dollars of lost revenue because people refuse to deal with that one person or that one manager. People are too busy avoiding the issue of having the conversation to identify the behavior and work to solve for it. So productivity ultimately slows, it fails, and it has an impact on the success of the organization. The conversations are happening, but they're happening not with the person that's having the issue. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but it's when one employee pulls another one into that conference room and shuts the door and says, gosh, do I need to vent? Can you believe it? How do we put up with this individual, right? So the conversations are happening, but they're not the clear, direct conversation confronting the behavior, and it costs us productivity. Number three is more toxicity. So this one's interesting. According to recent studies, the presence of one bad apple, one toxic employee, can cause the entire team's performance to drop by 30%. That's staggering to me. And adding to that, not only will it drop performance, but it causes other team members to adopt similar toxic behavior. Employees are more likely to engage in toxic behavior if they're exposed to it. Negativity begets negativity. So that let me pull you into a conference room and vent to you conversation actually has a very big impact on the success of a team and an organization. It leads to a suffering organizational culture. More negativity equals less trust and more conflict. In a nutshell, when we avoid dealing with toxic behavior, we lose good people and paying clients, we lose productivity, and we invite more negativity and put the culture at risk. So now that we're all depressed, because I think that this is really big stuff, we don't often stop to really look at the true impact of this behavior. It does sound a bit doom and gloom. The good news is it doesn't have to be this way. And at Fierce, we've definitely worked with clients from all industries, so talk about small businesses, global players, school districts, universities, and we have a global reach. And through all of our work with those clients around the world, we have learned one very important thing, if not a whole list of things from those clients, but one very important one that I'm going to talk about today. And that is that an organization's bottom line and its culture share the same driver, and that's conversation. What gets talked about in a company, and even more important, how it gets talked about and who is invited to the conversation, determines what will or won't happen. So what gets talked about, how it gets talked about, who's invited, determines whether the culture will suffer or not, whether productivity will slow, whether trust is starting to erode. Conversations are the driver. So less than 1 in 5 people surveyed in that Fierce survey believe, interestingly enough, after all of this, that a coworker will change once they're confronted. That's a very low number. And at Fierce, here's our thought on that. The root cause of a lack of change is not due to inviting the conversation. Instead, it's due to a widespread lack of confrontation skills in organizations. See, the conversations can be your key to success or your driver to success, or by way of avoidance or lack of skill, and that's a big deal, they have the potential to make things worse. I've definitely seen, experienced, been a part of confrontation conversations where people have approached and directly confronted behavior and done so in a less than skilled manner, and it's gone the other direction. So it's not just about inviting the conversation, we're really talking about having the skill. Without the skills to confront, it's really not surprising that employees don't feel as though the tactic is successful. So they want to avoid any further conversation and they don't want to put themselves in the line of fire. And this cycle can actually be the downfall of a really good team or an organization. Remember that one individual can truly impact the entire picture. So effective leaders know this. We've worked with them, and they're taking action to skill up in their confrontation skills. There are leaders in organizations who are creating a positive working environment where this toxic behavior, when it surfaces, is dealt with very swiftly and very effectively. Now, we're not saying you can completely douse toxic behavior. I think it's going to be human, it's inherent, it's going to pop up. The question is, how do you deal with it when it does? Or are you dealing with it? These leaders that are finding success are having the difficult and necessary conversations to drive results. They're confronting behavior, they're having fierce conversations. Now the big question that you're all sitting there asking is, how do I join the ranks of those leaders who are doing it well? Well, perhaps if we were able to bring in that 20% into this conversation, we'd get a whole bunch of really great best practices from them. While we can't do that, I can certainly share a few strategies from a Fierce perspective. So, what can you do to mitigate this, to remove the effects of toxic behavior? Now, for those of you who are sitting there, well, this is saying to yourself, well, this is all fine and good, but really I don't have the position or authority to confront anybody or this person and the person I wrote down. Let me ask you this, as this just brings it home for us. If you were doing something that was damaging to your team, your coworkers, your clients, your organization, would you want to know? If you were really doing harm, would you want to know? All right, I'm going to assume that the answer is yes. And so for today, for the next just 30 minutes or less, I want us to lay aside the excuses and use this 30 minutes to empower ourselves with some real skill and a new mindset. It's going to take courage. These are not easy conversations. And yet this is how we start building the culture that we say we want. So we do all have the power to start removing toxicity from our teams. And it's just about mastering that courage and building the skill to confront it. So one more poll before I introduce you to our strategies. Think about that person whose behavior you'd like to change. And when you contemplate having the conversation, when you think about sitting down, facing that person on the other side of the table, and you're ready to confront, what do you feel? You have some options. One is excitement. All right, let's do this. This is the best part of my day. Said no one ever. Anxiety. My palms are sweaty. My heart is racing. Not looking forward to this. Or pure dread. So this is where you're saying, I'm suddenly not feeling well. Perhaps I should go home. I feel the avoidance flu coming on, right? So let's hop over to the results and see where we're at. I have some awesome go-getters in this group, and I wish we could have a conversation. I think this is awesome. So we have some people that are really excited, and they say, let's do this. I want it. And that's probably the 20% who are saying, yes, we do this and do it often because we know there are results on the other side of that. But I think that's fantastic. And for the rest of you, anxiety, yes. The majority of us feel some level of anxiety when we're going to confront someone's behavior. Usually it's because we're not quite sure what's on the other side of that, right? There could be a lot that comes at us that we're not expecting, specifically the other person's reaction. And pure dread, you know, I have to say I have an affinity toward this group that says pure dread, because even though I've been doing this for years, it's still very, very difficult for me. I end up with that stomach issue before I walk into these conversations. And I know that this is the way that we get results, right? So that's what pushes me forward. So thank you all for your response on that. Most of us do feel anxious. I don't really know many people in their jobs who wake up in the morning and say, I can't wait to get into work and confront that person. Most people are concerned about the reaction. So will they understand what I'm trying to say? Will I make matters worse? How will they react? And so the following, and we're going to go back now to our lovely slide deck and talk a little bit about the strategies that you can use to help you have the conversation effectively. So hopefully these will give you more confidence to engage with that other person, change the behavior while enriching the relationship. I want to pause there for a second. This is the intent here is not to damage the relationship, but more to be in service of the other person and the relationship that you have. That's going to become important as we start to talk through these 5 strategies. So the first one, avoid the common pitfalls of confrontation. There are common errors that many of us make when conducting the conversation, even with the best of intent. So in addition to being less than effective, these can actually be pretty destructive. The first one is to start off the conversation by saying, so, how's it going? I guarantee you that they're not going to look at you and say, wow, I am so glad you asked. It's not going well. My behavior has become toxic and I need to fix it. They're not going to say that. So often out of nerves or discomfort, we try to ease into confrontation. And this is common when initiating a confrontation conversation. While it seems benign, because what could be the problem with this approach, right? I mean, we think that this is so benign. I'm going to just start the conversation. The problem is, A, we already know how it's going and it's not going well, right? And do you think the other person probably knows this? Most likely. So it's inauthentic to begin a conversation like this. Instead, begin by naming the behavior that's causing the problem. So we suggest you start with something as simple as, I'd like to talk with you about the effect your communication style is having on the team. That's an example. Very simple, very high level. Notice I didn't say, I want to talk with you about the effect your horribly inefficient communication style is having on my dear, poor, hardworking team, right? So be careful of how you're using judgment or editorializing. Keep it high level, keep it basic, keep it simple and direct. And avoid, so how's it going? The second common pitfall, no dumping. Don't dump. So have you ever been confronted by someone and they just go on and on and on when they introduce the issue? What happens? What happens in your brain? I mean, at a certain point, we're no longer able to take in everything they're saying, right? The message gets lost. We start to feel attacked. We maybe even start building our own defense. When we dump on someone, Certainly it may feel good to us because we've gotten everything off of our chest, but it has the opposite effect that we intended. If you're the dumper in the conversation, you become, as I called, the crazy person, and the tables turn, right? You just continue to offload all of these grievances, and it becomes murky at best. The key is to deliver the message in a way that's clear, direct, and will help build the relationship, not destroy it. So come up with 1 or 2 examples, at the most 3, to describe the behavior. Do not dump all your grievances from the last 5, 10, 30 years for this person. Really start to identify what is the issue, and then what are those examples. And finally, avoiding the common pitfalls. Too many pillows. So too many pillows around a message can actually suffocate a person. We had a client in one of our Fierce classes who shared that she did this. She said she did this when she heard what this was. And I'll share the example first because I think it's easier to understand. She said she brought one of her employees into her office once with the intent of firing them. It just wasn't working. And the woman admitted that she started the conversation praising how much the employee had actually contributed in her time at the company and how likable they were. But for certain reasons, it wasn't working. But when she started the conversation this way, it was so misleading that the employee walked out thinking they'd just been promoted. Now, how fun do you think that follow-up conversation was? Too many pillows. We usually fall into this. For those of us who don't want to hurt someone, tend to put a lot, or who want to be liked. I don't know how many of you like to be liked. I certainly do. So it's with the best of intentions that we do this, but when we pad the conversation or the message so much, we lose the message. So we say things like, well, I'm sure you didn't mean to do it, or hey, it's not so much that I have the issue, but HR is making me have this conversation with you. The real message gets absolutely lost, and the other person may not hear what you really want them to hear. So these are the 3 common pitfalls. Avoid those. Your conversations will go more effectively, will run smoother if you can. Number 2, prepare and practice. So prepare. You know, it is important to prepare ourselves for these conversations. Confronting behavior doesn't mean that you put yourself into a room with the other person and you just let it rip. This is about enriching, and I know leaders who that is their approach. And do you think there's a lot of trust that's been built when that's the approach? This is really about enriching the working relationship. It's not about beating the other person to a pulp, because we have to continue to work with these individuals. So to help you prepare, we suggest that you get clear on your opening remarks. This is not about writing the entire script of the conversation. This is not saying, here's what I'm going to say, then they're going to follow with X, then I'm going to respond. No. This is about thinking through the issue and the impact that it's having on you, the team, and the organization. So do your due diligence. You know, here are some recommendations. Ask yourself these questions. What is the issue? That's number 1. And avoid the common pitfalls. So go back to strategy number 1. And why is it important? Why is this issue so important? If it wasn't important, you certainly wouldn't be having this conversation. So put some thought into what's at stake, right? And then secondly, it's really about practice. Find yourself a friend so you can do what I say is hear yourself speak. I don't know if you've ever had the experience where what you say is a far cry from what the other person heard. Even when we confront with the best of intentions, our message can have an impact that we weren't expecting. So what you think you said may not be what was actually heard. And there's a physiological reason for this. There's a part of your brain that's responsible for this. It's called the STS. It's superior temporal sulcus. You don't have to remember that. I had to look down to remember it. It's the STS. It's located just above your ear. So as the other person speaks to us, our STS is engaged, and it's actually searching for the meaning of the message. It's searching for the tone of voice and the emotion so it can make meaning from it. It's a critical tool that helps our brain decipher the meaning when someone confronts or challenges our behavior. Interestingly enough, when we are the ones doing the speaking, so when we're confronting someone else, that part of our brain, the STS, shuts off. We literally can't hear the tone of our own voice or how it may be landing with the other person. And this makes sense. I mean, think about the last time you heard a recording of your own voice. What was your reaction? Probably something along the lines of, oh, turn it off, Doesn't sound like me. The reason is because your brain doesn't actually know you. Your STS doesn't recognize you. It is shut off when you're speaking, and it can't put meaning to the emotion or the tone in your voice. You are blind to that part of your message. So we suggest you take the blinders off. And to do that, get yourself a buddy and practice your opening remarks. So allow the other person to be your ears and get clear on how your message is landing. I can't stress that enough. I think that's so important. And you'll be amazed when you actually do sit down with someone and they give you some feedback or coach you on that, that sometimes we assume our message is landing in ways that it really is not. So prepare and practice. Strategy 3, talk emotion, don't get emotional. All right, so in 2002, this is a while ago, but the Nobel Prize for Economics went to a man by the name of Daniel Kahneman. He's a fascinating individual. If you want to do some, look him up, I highly recommend it. His name is Daniel Kahneman. Now, Kahneman proved, the reason he won this, he sort of stumbled into it with his research, but he ended up proving that human beings, regardless of race, age, ethnicity, gender, make decisions emotionally first and rationally second. Our emotion is what drives our action. So, in other words, without an emotional connection, successful change cannot occur. Now, confrontation is a conversation in which we are asking, or telling, insisting that someone change their behavior, right? There's a lot at stake. Behavior needs to change. So that being said, part of a successful confrontation is the ability for the person that's confronting to share their emotions. Answering questions, thinking through these, and sharing them with the other person. How is this impacting you? Confronter. What are you feeling? Are you frustrated? Are you surprised, concerned? Think about that person whose name you wrote down earlier, that person who you need to confront. How is their behavior impacting you? What do you feel? Put words to it. Are you angry? Are you concerned? Are you frustrated? Because talking about emotions is intimate and it's disarming. You're letting that person know that you're actually affected by their behavior. You're vulnerable, and emotions make it personal. Now, something that we need to remember when we're talking about this is that we're describing our emotions in a confrontation. We're not acting them out. You can tell someone you're angry, but you don't need to pin them up against the wall and shout to get the point across. When you start acting out your emotion, and that even includes, that's a pretty exaggerated example, but, slamming the door, slamming your fist down on a table, raising your voice, when you start acting out emotion, the conversation gets sidetracked, or worse, it can become a fight. Now, the question is, what happens when the other person gets emotional? So many leaders have said to me, well, Beth, I don't want to hurt their feelings. I don't want to get them upset. So I just really prefer to let it be. I don't want to rock the boat. But remember, people react emotionally first and rationally second. So their emotion is not the problem. They're going to react to something that they're surprised to hear when you confront their behavior. It's when we fight it, when we go there with them or we avoid the conversation because of that emotion, that things get out of hand. Trust me, I've been in HR for many, many years. You can have empathy, confront behavior, and the other person can talk through their tears. Slide the box of tissue over, give them a moment to center themselves, and continue the conversation. Remember, their emotion is not the problem. It's when we fight it or we go there and get emotional with them that causes the breakdown in the conversation. So describe your emotions, don't act them out. 4, invite the other person to respond. So important. A good confrontation should invite perspectives from all parties, not just the person that's confronting. This is not a one-way conversation. I always tell people, if you're looking to end the relationship, if you're looking to send someone packing from the relationship, if you're looking to make them available to industry or fire them, this is not the conversation you want to have. That's a different conversation, and likely that is one way. This is a proactive conversation with the intent of surfacing the issue and solving for the issue together. And you have to find it in yourself to really want to resolve this issue and continue the relationship with this person. You may think you know everything there is to know about the situation, the person, the behavior, and yet I would invite you to take a step back. Could there be another explanation for this person's behavior? Perhaps the issue is not entirely their fault, or maybe the problem is bigger than just one individual. To make the best possible decisions to solve for these issues, to change behavior, these conversations need to include the perspective of both parties. I'll share an example. This is personal. Well, it's professional, personal. I worked for a company several years ago that was merging with another organization that was based 6 states away. And our learning departments, which I was a part of at the time, they were merging, and I was asked to co-lead a project with my counterpart from the other company 6 states away. And I was hesitant because it did not escape me, and I'm a bit of an alarmist anyway, but it didn't escape me that perhaps this was a test, right? So perhaps this was the ultimate weeding out, and only one of us was going to emerge with the job. And so we had several project meetings, and quite frankly, none of them were very pleasant. Because according to my perspective, my counterpart was combative. She never liked a single idea I had. And when our conversations actually got a little heated because we disagreed, she just had some excuse that popped up and she had to get off the phone. She bailed. And I was getting so frustrated because nothing was getting accomplished. So, and to me, this was all her fault, right? So fast forward a few weeks, and she was invited north to visit the corporate office that I worked in, so we had a chance to go to dinner together. And I mustered up the courage to actually have the conversation. I explained my experience of her behavior, the impact it had on me, my concern about our work and our working relationship. And when I invited her to respond, she said to me, well, you know you're going to be the one that has a job after this anyway, and I'm going to be the one that's out. Because it seems everyone from your office is staying and everyone from my office is getting the axe. Wow. That was when I started to see the motivation behind her behavior, because we continued the conversation for well over an hour. And what I realized is that not only was my counterpart terrified of losing her job, as I was, we had that in common, she had essentially already given up. She'd given it to me. She threw in the towel, but her frustration and resentment over it lingered. Her emotion was still there, and it was burning strong. So it was impacting our work, and it wasn't surprising that her behavior was this way, given her motivation. But what was so important was the fact that we were able to break through this surface behavior and figure out what really was going on, because that allowed us to find common ground and share that we both had the same fear, which actually brought us closer together and got us to work a little bit more effectively. Now, fast forward, in case you're wondering, we both kept our jobs. I don't think it was because of our work on the project. I think it just happened to be that either we got lucky or maybe they were saving a few more jobs in our department. Either way, we kept our jobs. But it showed me one thing which Fierce had always taught me, and we still talk to our clients about, which is this: everyone owns a piece of the truth. But no one can own the entire truth. It's impossible to see things from all perspectives all of the time. You have your perspective, your reasoning, your experience, and so does the other person. And in order to bring the entire truth to light, it takes skilled conversation. It takes the ability to get to that level where you can start to find what's actually the issue and solve for it. So that is number 4, invite the other person to respond. And finally, number 5, this is when all else fails. And I'd like to put this in bold and underline it and italicize it. When all else fails, talk with your boss. At Fierce, we know that toxicity can be improved, can be removed by having those skillful, honest confrontation conversations. And yet, sometimes, even with our best efforts at play, nothing actually changes. And that's frustrating, because when you feel you've done everything in your power to confront the behavior and still nothing is changing, then it's time to shift gears. And when all else fails, run the problem up the flagpole and share it with your boss. Now, if this last resort is an option that you find yourself in, we have a few tips for you to keep in mind. And these were actually recently shared by our very own Executive VP, Stacey Engel, in a CNBC interview. So this is available. The longer format of this is available, but I'll share some of these tips with you if you need to run this up the flagpole to your boss. The first one is know the issue. This may seem obvious, but be sure you can describe the toxic traits and the nature of your relationship with your coworker. It doesn't do any good to simply say, this person's toxic, do something about it. Some of the traits we described earlier were laziness, negative attitude, blaming others, and those are ones you can actually use. But also be sure you have specific examples, this is so important, of times you have felt the employee has affected your job or the work of the team. I mean, you could have an example like a project that was going wrong or the satisfaction that you have for your own role. I don't know what that looks like, but in addition to being able to describe their behavior, what's the impact that it's having? That's number one, know your issue. Number two, schedule time. Do not spring this on your boss in the hallway or the parking lot or the cafeteria. Schedule a meeting. First and foremost, you deserve your boss's full attention on this, and they deserve your full attention as well to help them understand what's going on. So make it a priority for both of you. And share your interest in resolving this issue and communicating next steps. One of the most surprising themes from our fear survey, and it was in the description of this webcast, is that employees still feel that there's little recourse other than to ignore coworkers' toxicity because they lack faith in their management's ability or willingness to address the problem. The big issue I see here, and I've fallen into this trap myself, so I'm in it, is that we go to our boss with the intent to give them our problem. I can't do this anymore, you fix it. Or if you've heard this one, this is above my pay grade. I don't get paid enough, you handle it. And I say that in jest, but we do. We go to our boss saying, here, I'm giving this person to you. You need to handle their performance. You're the boss, right? If this person, I just want to say this one thing. If this person is affecting you, then you are required to be a part of the solution. They're having an impact on you. So be clear with your boss that this is something you want to resolve, not just dump on them, and then be prepared to share your thoughts and work together to help shift the behavior. So these are big tips because this is really when all else fails. This is not about going and just, it's not a dump and run of this issue. It's truly coming to your boss with a skilled conversation to solve for it. So I want to save time for questions. So I'm going to sum this up with a couple of, because we've covered a lot, so I want to sum it up a little bit and then move into Q&A. But toxic employees are costly, not just to the well-being of individuals, but the well-being of your business. They cost us people, they cost us productivity, and they beget more toxicity from others, and that just becomes a slippery slope to ride. Second, equally as harmful as toxic behavior is our unwillingness to do something about it. And it's to recognize that there is a detriment when we're not having the conversation. To remove toxic behavior, to mitigate it, here's what we suggest. One is to avoid the common pitfalls. Remember, avoid starting the conversation with, so how's it going? Don't dump on the other person, and don't pad the conversation with too many pillows. So make sure you're being clear and direct, use a couple of strong examples, and avoid starting the conversation with, so how's it going? Prepare and practice. So remember, it is important to spend some time thinking about what the issue is and what's at stake. And also make sure that you have a chance to grab a buddy and hear yourself speak through their ears, right? Practice it. Talk emotion, don't get emotional. This is not time for you to, and this can be hard. I have to say, this is like a be calm and confront. You know, it's very difficult to do that. And so this was going to take a lot of work to keep our emotions in check, but be able to actually describe them. That's the skill that's embedded in this. Talk emotion, don't get emotional. Invite a response. This is not a one-way dialogue. This is about inviting the other person's perspective because we can't possibly own the entire truth. We can only we have a piece of the truth, but we can't see it from all perspectives all of the time. And finally, in caps and bold and italics, when all else fails, run it up the flagpole. And when you do, make sure that you're bringing a skilled conversation with your boss, not a dump and run episode. So What's next? So often we do these webinars and participants enjoy the new knowledge or perspective, but a big question that we hear and they walk away with is, okay, that's great, but what do I do now? How do I bring this to my team? Or how do I assess if there's more to do than just the skills I was given? I don't know what's next. So if you're asking some of those questions sitting here right now, here's what we recommend. Number one, assess the skill level. That is the biggest thing, I think, from an HR perspective, learning and development, leadership. Do people have the skills needed to have the conversation successfully? Specifically, do they have the skills to confront this behavior? If the answer is no, or I don't know, we invite you to have the first conversation with us. Fierce has been working for nearly 2 decades with thousands of companies and leaders to help employees have the conversations that matter. So have the conversations that will get you results by first reaching out to us if you're a little uncertain or confused or you need some support. That's why we're here. Go to www.fierceinc.com and we'd be happy to support you. And finally, I'll just leave you with a really great infographic. So from our Toxic Employee Survey, you can download it. I'm not going to read the entire URL because it's quite long, but I'll leave the slide here because it's not a live URL so you can write it down and go right onto our website and snag that free infographic. And with that, we have about 5 minutes, so we have time for a couple of questions. I'll toss it over to Holly to pull on some of those.
All right, and thank you, Beth, once more for delivering an awesome presentation today. So as far as question goes, we've had multiple people ask the one question, but first the question came in from someone by the name of HP and then by Mike. So basically the question being asked is, what if the toxic person is the one in charge? Like, how do you suggest we address a toxic person when they are the owner of the company?
Okay, so there's two different things there. The owner or the CEO of a company and the one in charge or my boss, right? So there's a couple of different things hanging out there. And I get this question a lot because I think that's the big thing. We say, when all else fails, go to your boss. Well, what if it's your boss that's the toxic employee? First of all, I would check myself because sometimes the fear of bringing the conversation or confronting the behavior with our boss, we avoid that conversation and we use the excuse, well, it's my boss, I can't confront up, I can't do it. And I would check that. I'm not going to challenge, I'll ask, but I won't challenge the culture in your organization if you say, well, it's not okay for me to confront my boss. If you see that a conversation needs to be had, then it's up to you to extend the invitation for that conversation. And remember what I said, if you knew your behavior was harming someone or your team or organization, would you want to know? So it's up to you to invite that. So I'd first check, have you had the conversation? Or is that an excuse, a train that's left the station? And if you have and you're still struggling and it doesn't seem to be going well and it truly is having an impact, and here again, this is one of those situations where we do have support systems in our organization for a reason. So is it something that we need to bring to HR or a third party? That might be your option. And I would say with a little bit of a caveat, because HR, 90% of the conversations that HR has with individuals could have been had by the employee that's having the issue or by the leader that's having the issue. And we tend to go to HR instead, and that's because of a lack of skill. So once again, I know it's challenging to confront up, it's challenging to coach up and give feedback up. And these are the types of conversations that when we can start having them up, down, across the organization, that's when we start to see the sea change. That's when we start to see the culture shift. So that's a great question.
All right, thank you, Beth. Our next question is a great question that pertains to human resources. So the question is, how do you get human resources buy-in to have the conversation? Supervisors avoid these conversations due to receiving reprimands themselves.
I think I'm a little confused on the question. So how do you get HR to have the could you repeat that again? I think I'm just slightly confused about the question. So let's try it one more time and we'll see if I can get clearer.
Yeah, sure. So the question follows a comment that supervisors avoid these conversations due to the possibility of receiving reprimands themselves. So how do you get HR buy-in to have the conversation if that assumption is the case?
Okay, so how do you get HR's help is what I'm hearing.
I believe so.
If you're worried about the reprimands, right?
I
think that's what HR. Yeah. So first of all, I'll go back to my last comment, which is, once again, we can create a whole list of fears and potential outcomes that we're so afraid of happening: reprimand, losing the relationship, they're going to retaliate, all of these things that we create in our head about what could happen. And I usually ask people to think first, consider those, okay, what could happen, but more importantly, what could happen if you have the conversation and it actually goes well? That sometimes tends to shift us out of the rut that we're in, that I can't have this conversation because I'll get reprimanded or I'll get retaliated against. So first, check yourself that truly you're not able to, and I would say 9 times out of 10 you are able to. It's our fears that get in the way. So how do you master the courage to invite the conversation? Once you have done that, and once you have tried and all else fails, I would imagine that the buy-in of HR is, here are the conversations I've had and how they have not worked. Here's what I've said. Here are the attempts that I've made. And like I said, I've been in HR for pretty much my whole career, whether it was in a general HR function or L&D or leadership development. And so HR, any really strong HR team would be very supportive if that was the dialogue that came to them, that this isn't the first step I'm making. I've had the conversation and it's failed. Can you help me have this conversation more successfully? But here again, I really believe that each and every one of us has the power to help shift that behavior if we're able to have the skilled conversation and muster up the courage to do so. It's not easy, but I guarantee you that if we give it our best, 9 times out of 10, that relationship, that issue can be solved.
All right, thanks so much for those answers, Beth. And we do have plenty of questions that have come in, but we are not going to be able to get to those as we've just hit the bottom of the hour. But everyone online with us, know that we'll pass those questions on to Beth and she can follow up with you very soon. So from all of us here at HCI, thank you to Fierce, Beth, and everyone for being with us, and have a great day.